Hello, it's Dr. Labby from the Sayreville Public Schools. I hope that this video finds you well and that everyone in your family is healthy and safe. As you might have imagined, I'm contacting you now because we recently received notification from the New Jersey Department of Education that our 2020-21 Restart of School Plan has been approved and that we can now share it with you. However, before I do share it with you, I do ask that you keep an open mind while watching the entire presentation and reviewing the plan thoroughly. While some things may have changed, much of the health conditions in New Jersey have not really changed much since we left school in June. Therefore, the task that our pandemic response team had in order to develop a plan to safely reopen our schools for in-person instruction was very difficult and quite challenging. Nevertheless, while it's certainly not perfect, and certainly not what you would expect in any normal year, we hope that you find that it is the best we possibly can do now. Enjoy the presentation. Welcome to the Sayreville Public Schools Restart of School Plan presentation. In accordance with the guidance that we received from the New Jersey Department of Education via the Roadback Manual, this plan consists of 4 components: leadership for planning, policy and funding, conditions for learning, and continuity of learning. For the sake of this presentation, we are only going to focus on leadership and planning, which consists of stakeholder involvement, summer pilot programs, scheduling, and the potential tentative calendar that we may use to begin the 2020-21 school year. However, I do recommend that you take the time to read through very carefully the entire Restart of School Plan. As recommended in the aforementioned New Jersey Department of Education Roadback Manual, the district involved all stakeholders in the collaborative development of this Restart Plan. We felt strongly that since the pandemic response team did such an effective job of closing our schools for in-person instruction during the spring of 2020, while also maintaining the continuity of learning as well as nutrition, that it was only fitting that they also be responsible for creating a plan that would allow us to reopen our schools safely and restart educating our students both in person and virtually. However, we also sent this plan in advance to our collective bargaining units in order to receive their feedback, as we also did with our Board of Education. As you also know, we created a Restart of Schools survey and asked all of our community members to provide us with their feedback on it. That survey closed on July 29th. We will review the responses later in this presentation. As you also know, this plan was sent to the New Jersey Department of Education for their feedback, review, and ultimately their approval. Once we are finished sharing this presentation, we will ask each of our schools to assemble what are called school restart committees so that they can begin the process of collaboratively developing individual school restart plans. As I just mentioned, on July 10th, we asked all stakeholders in Sayreville to complete a brief Restart of School survey. As of July 29th, when that survey officially closed, 3,164 people responded, 73% of which were parents and/or guardians. Of those who responded, 50% were not comfortable with opening our schools for in-person instruction. 40% felt that virtual instruction was the methodology most aligned with their concerns, while 35% felt that virtual learning blended with in-person instruction was the best methodology for them. 64% identified that abbreviated in-person instructional day blended with a portion of virtual learning was one of their top 3 models for reopening our schools, as opposed to 53% who selected alternating abbreviated days of in-person instruction blended with a portion of virtual instruction and full virtual instructional days model. And 52% chose the full day virtual instruction for all students every day as one of their top 3 models for restarting schools in September. It's important to also note that 39% of the respondents selected virtual instruction for all students every day as their top choice, while 25% selected full-day in-person instruction for all students every day as their number 1 selection. Since those were the two top choices by our respondents, it's clear that we have very opposing viewpoints as to how we should reopen our schools. However, we learned much more than that from the survey. Along with the dichotomy between the respondents who selected full-time remote learning as opposed to those who selected full-time in-person learning, we affirmed the priorities of all stakeholders in Sayreville, which is by far the safety of our students and staff, and how effectively we can promote student learning. We also learned that our plan should have a virtual or remote instruction component blended with in-person learning, and that virtual learning must be uniformed, structured in a more synchronous way with our schedules, and it must be more robust. An abbreviated day was also something that respondents preferred, especially because of the temperatures in our buildings during September and October, which we all know can be quite hot, and that can be exacerbated by students and staff having to wear masks. Speaking of masks, we learned that it is essential and that very few students and staff members should have a medically documented reason for not being able to wear one. Therefore, this plan includes the mandatory wearing of masks unless, again, someone has a medically documented reason that would prohibit them from being able to do so. And finally, we learned that alternating cohort days are preferred so that we can reduce capacity not only in our school buildings, but in those classrooms as well as on our buses. This summer, the pandemic clearly impacted the educational programming that we normally offer. However, we forged ahead and implemented our three major programs, which includes our extended school year program for students with disabilities, middle school credit completion, and English as a second language. With the exception of our extended school year program, in which we blended in-person with virtual instruction for the final 2.5 weeks, which is from July 22nd through August 6th, our middle school credit completion and English as a second language summer programs were all conducted virtually. Finally, our student athletes returned to play in what was called Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the guidance provided by the New Jersey State Interscholastic Athletic Association. So what did we ascertain from these programs? Well, first and foremost, we learned that in order to establish a virtual instruction foundation, it is essential that each child has access to Wi-Fi and an educational device. We also learned that alternating reduced capacity, abbreviated days of in-person instruction and blending them with synchronous virtual instruction is effective and safe, provided that you follow social distancing requirements and restrictions, which includes wearing masks, and provide personal protective equipment and procedures to staff. Likewise, we learned that reduced capacity busing with, again, social distancing requirements and restrictions, personal protective equipment, and procedures can also be both safe and efficient. Interestingly, we learned that students, including children with pervasive and developmental disabilities, will wear masks without much, if any, prompting and cueing. We confirmed that outdoor in-person athletics and instruction should be maximized, as it can be as effective and it is much safer. And finally, we learned that synchronous virtual instruction is much more structured and far more effective than the virtual instructional model used during the spring of 2020. As I'm sure you're already aware of, in accordance with the clarification provided by Governor Murphy and the New Jersey Department of Education on the option for parents and guardians to select for their children to participate in full-time virtual instruction rather than in the in-person instructional plans developed and outlined in this Restart of School plan, parents and/or guardians seeking such must request for their children to be transferred to the full-time remote learning program using the specific procedures indicated further in this plan, and as noted in this slide. Upon receipt of this written request, the child's principal will confirm with the parents and/or guardians a start date and end date for the participation in the full-time remote learning program. However, all requests for transfer in and/or out of full-time remote learning or any changes to dates or participation must be submitted in writing by the parent and/or guardians to the student's principal at a minimum of 5 school days in advance of the change and/or request start date. Finally, please note that once the district reaches Phase 4 of this plan, students participating in the full-time remote learning option will need to either transfer back to in-person instruction or their parents and/or guardians will need to apply for them to receive virtual home instruction. Rather than develop a single plan to start in-person instruction before thrusting the district back into full-time, quote-unquote, normal instruction, this plan will utilize a phased methodological approach so that students and staff can slowly and safely reacclimate themselves with in-person instruction in a school building environment. Moreover, as with this current stage model being used by New Jersey to reopen the economy, we will utilize the available health data provided by the New Jersey Department of Health and the New Jersey Department of Education to transition from one phase or stage to the next. Furthermore, we will use the phases to transition the district or individual schools to and back from a mandatory closure imposed by the New Jersey Department of Health or the governor. For instance, if a school incurs a high rate of infection during this plan and is ordered to close for in-person instruction, it will immediately move into what we call Phase 1, and you can see that in Figure A of the plan. And Phase 1 is essentially full-time virtual instruction. When the school is eventually allowed to reopen for in-person instruction, the district can then make a decision based upon, again, available health data on which phase would be the safest to return the school to for in-person instruction. Finally, since the ultimate goal of this plan is to eventually return our students and staff to full-time in-person instruction supplemented by virtual instruction, this phase approach will also provide our staff, students, and the parents and/or guardians of our students with the time they need to once again feel safe in our schools and to overcome whatever fear they may have using a steady, methodical, and scientific data approach rather than abruptly forcing them to come back for too much too soon. For the past decade, especially with the advancement of technology infrastructure, devices, and platforms, school districts have been exploring what is called a quote-unquote flipped classroom instructional approach, where the foundation of learning is developed at home virtually and then supported and supplemented by in-person instruction in school. Although the research on this philosophical approach is generally inconclusive and thus may not be supported during normal learning conditions, due to the pandemic, this plan will rely heavily on it during the first two phases, that's phases 2A and B, before slowly transitioning back to traditional in-person learning supported and supplemented by virtual instruction, beginning in Phase 3 and then in Phase 4 of this plan. As previously mentioned, and as indicated in the top portion of Figure A within this plan, Phase 1 consists solely of virtual instruction that will take place synchronously with the times in our early dismissal schedule. Although it was not synchronous with the aforementioned schedule, it is essentially the phase the school district was in during the spring of 2020. According to this plan, and in alignment with the guidance in the Roadback Manual, the district and/or individual schools can only be placed into this phase through either the order of the governor or by the direction of the New Jersey Department of Health, or if the governor were to provide school districts with the freedom to select this phase based upon the Department of Health data. Phase 2A establishes a virtual instructional base in order to educate students safely using what we mentioned before, a flipped classroom instructional approach. Therefore, students will participate in in-person instruction at a significantly reduced capacity and duration and frequency of exposure level. Hence, in this phase, students will be split into one of two alphabet-based cohorts district-wide, Cohort A and Cohort B, and will participate in one abbreviated day, using the early dismissal schedule, per week of in-person instruction in school and 4 days of synchronous virtual instruction. Likewise, on the days when students are not in school for in-person instruction, they will be required to participate virtually in synchronous, again following a schedule, instruction during the time in which the other cohort is being instructed in person. Therefore, in this phase, teachers will be required to perform in-person instruction in school 2 days per week, in which they will live stream for students who will be attending virtually at the same time. However, sent students with disabilities in the district's Applied Behavioral Analysis, Multiple Disabilities, and Behavioral Disabilities special self-contained classrooms are already naturally at a reduced capacity level. They will have 2 abbreviated days of in-person instruction and 3 days of synchronous virtual instruction during this phase. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Friday, all students and faculty will participate in virtual instruction that is synchronous with the early dismissal schedule so that schools and buses can be deep cleaned and so that any staff member or student who wishes to do so can get COVID-19 tested. Teachers will also provide virtual instruction on these days from their residence or in a location other than their school so that their classroom can be thoroughly sanitized. During all in-person and virtual instruction days in this phase, all certified faculty will hold virtual office hours for the last hour of their school's normal academic day schedule. Along with establishing the necessary virtual instruction foundation for the flipped classroom learning approach, reducing capacity in classrooms and on buses, limiting the duration and frequency of exposure for our students and staff, and providing the necessary time for our students and staff to feel safe with and to readjust to in-person instruction, this phase also takes into consideration indoor dining restrictions and the potential heat in our buildings, which are not climate controlled, as you all know. Since all students and staff will be required to wear face masks, educating them for a full day in September, especially during the first several weeks, will be quite hazardous due to the potential for very high classroom temperatures, particularly those in buildings with second and third floors. Therefore, as can be noted in phases 2A and B, as well as in 3, the district will perform in-person instruction using an early dismissal schedule and will supplement the remainder of the academic day with faculty office hours that will be used to assist students in need of extra help and or to answer any questions by students. Furthermore, due to the restrictions for indoor dining and the potential spreading of COVID-19 during times in which students have to lower their masks to eat, students in preschool through 5th grade will eat their pre-packed bagged lunches in their classrooms during in-person instructional days, while students in grades 6 through 12 will not be permitted to eat during their lunch periods. Instead, they will have the opportunity to take home pre-packed and bagged lunches when they are dismissed at 12:32 and 1 p.m. respectively. On the days when students are participating in virtual instruction, pre-packed and bagged breakfasts and lunches will be delivered to families in need at designated locations in Sayreville using the same procedures described in Phase 1, which, by the way, are identical to those that were used throughout the spring of 2020. Finally, Phase 2A incorporates time in between in-person instruction so that classrooms and buses can be thoroughly cleaned and sanitized before the next cohort of students enter them. As you can see, Phase 2B is very similar to 2A, except that the frequency of exposure increases as a result of 1 additional day of in-person instruction for students and 3 more for faculty. In this phase, Cohort A will participate in in-person instruction on Tuesdays and Fridays, while Cohort B participates in synchronous virtual instruction. Conversely, on Mondays and Thursdays, Cohort B will participate in in-person instruction, while Cohort A participates in synchronous virtual instruction. Therefore, rather than students having 1 day of in-person and 4 days of synchronous virtual instruction, as was the case in Phase 2A, they will now participate in 2 days of in-person and 3 synchronous virtual instructional days, including one which will take place on Wednesdays so that classrooms and buses can be thoroughly cleaned and sanitized, and so that staff and students can have the time to get COVID-19 tested if they desire such. However, just as with Phase 2A, send students with disabilities in the Applied Behavioral Analysis, Multiple Disabilities, and Behavioral Disabilities special self-contained classrooms are already naturally at a reduced capacity level. They will now have 4 abbreviated days of in-person instruction and 1 day of synchronous virtual instruction during this phase. Also, as with Phase 2A, during all in-person and virtual instructional days within this phase, all certificated faculty will hold virtual office hours for the last hour of their school's normal academic day schedule. As I mentioned previously, in Phase 3, the district now begins to shift back to the traditional in-person instruction supplemented by virtual instruction learning approach. In addition, for the first time, classrooms and buses will now be filled to capacity levels, and students will now be required to attend school 4 days per week for an abbreviated early dismissal day schedule of in-person instruction, supplemented with faculty office hours for the remainder of the academic day. However, as with phases 2A and B, students in preschool through 5th grade will eat their pre-packed bagged breakfasts and lunches in their classrooms during in-person instructional days, while students in grades 6 through 12 will still have the opportunity to take them home and eat them there. In addition, all students and staff will participate in one synchronous virtual instructional day on Wednesdays so that classrooms and buses can be thoroughly cleaned and sanitized, and so that staff and students can still have the time to get COVID-19 tested if they desire to do such. In addition, during all in-person and virtual instructional days in this phase, once again, all certificated faculty will hold virtual office hours for the last hour of their school's normal academic day schedule. Phase 4. Welcome back to normal. Well, what they call the new normal. In Phase 4, students and staff will finally return to normal, or once again, new normal, full-day in-person instruction every day. However, during this phase, all teachers will be strongly encouraged to continue with the substantial element of virtual instruction for homework purposes so as to not dull their proficiency with this form of instruction, nor the ability of their students to continue learning via it. We're hoping by the time we get to Phase 4 that we'll be done with this pandemic, but no one can say with certainty that that will be the case. Although ultimately, an executive order by the governor and or direction from the state or county Department of Health may dictate or influence the district's decision to start our plan based upon the 2020-21 school district calendar snapshot presented in this slide. The current plan is to begin the year with the students in grades 1 through 12 participating during the first 2 days of school on September 3rd and 4th in synchronous virtual instruction. Doing such will afford our students and staff the time needed to once again develop a foundation for virtual instruction, which again is vital for that flipped classroom instructional approach that the district will take during phases 2A and B. However, please keep in mind that soon after the release of this plan, the parents of guardians of all students will have the opportunity to opt out of the in-person instruction outlined in it and designate their child for the previously mentioned full-time remote learning program. Nevertheless, in order to successfully begin the school year with virtual instruction for these and all students, the district will ensure that each child has equitable access to Wi-Fi and educational devices. Thus, during early July, as part of the enrollment update, the district surveyed parents and guardians on their technology needs, which included access to Wi-Fi and educational devices for each child in each household. Likewise, by the last week of August, the district will ensure that each staff member and family member that identified a need is provided with the resources they require in order to equitably and successfully participate in virtual instruction. Finally, along with participating in virtual faculty department meetings and participating in required professional development and or training during the first 2 contractual days of work for faculty, they will report to their school in order to make personal contact with each of their students in all of their classes so that they can introduce themselves and prepare their students for the start of virtual instruction on September 3rd. By starting with virtual instruction on September 3rd and 4th, it will allow our schools the time to conduct reduced capacity in-person orientations for all students entering preschool, kindergarten, and grades 4, 6, and 9, as well as any new students to the district. Thus, on Thursday and Friday, each school will hold 2 separate orientations for 25% of each grade level and new students to the district. In addition, since teachers will be required to report to their schools on September 3rd and 4th to perform virtual instruction in their actual classrooms, they will also utilize the time to prepare their classrooms for the start of in-person instruction on September 8th in accordance with the social distancing requirements stipulated in this plan. As you can see from the calendar, In-person instruction for students will begin on September 8th for Cohort A and on September 10th for Cohort B. On the days when students are not in school for in-person instruction, they will be required to participate virtually in synchronous instruction during the time in which the other cohort is being instructed in person. However, on Wednesday and Friday the first week, as well as Monday, Wednesday, and Friday the following week, all students and faculty will participate in virtual instruction so that schools and buses can be deep cleaned and so that any staff members or students who wish to do so can get COVID-19 tested. Unlike September 3rd and 4th, teachers will provide virtual instruction from their residences or in a location other than their school so that their classroom can be thoroughly sanitized. Once again, the purpose of this phase is to develop the foundation for flipped classroom instruction by supplementing virtual instruction with in-person instruction 1 day per week for each student. If all goes well, Phase 2A will continue for 1 more week before transitioning into Phase 2B on Monday, September 21st. During this phase, students in Cohort A will meet for abbreviated day in-person instruction twice a week on September 22nd and 25th, while Cohort B meets on September 21st and 24th. As with Phase 2A, on the days when students are not in school for in-person instruction, they will be required to participate virtually in synchronous instruction during the time in which the other cohort is being instructed in person. However, on Wednesday, September 23rd, all students and faculty will participate in virtual instruction so that schools and buses can be deep cleaned and so that any staff members and/or students who wish to do so can get COVID-19 tested. Due to the shortened week because of the school holiday on September 28th, during the second week of this phase, Wednesday will be an in-person instructional day. However, if the district were to continue the week after that in this phase, that Wednesday and all subsequent Wednesdays will be virtual instruction days for all students and staff so that schools and buses can be sanitized and so that people can get tested. If the data continues to support advancement, we will continue with Phase 2B for 1 more week before transitioning to Phase 3 on October 5th. As mentioned when describing the phases, during Phase 3, our methodology will now begin to transition back to the traditional in-person instructional model supplemented by virtual instruction. Therefore, in Phase 3, all students in preschool through 12th grade will participate in abbreviated day in-person instruction 4 days a week on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. However, as with Phase 2B, Wednesday, October 7th and 14th, and all subsequent Wednesdays in this phase will be virtual instruction days for all students and staff so that the schools and buses can be sanitized and so that people can get tested. Lastly, if the data continues to support progress, the district will transition one last time on October 19th into normal, or what we refer to now as the new normal, full-day in-person instruction every day. As I'm sure that you've read about, listened to, and watched on television ad nauseum, reopening our schools for in-person instruction during this terrible pandemic and the most unprecedented time period in our lifetimes is nearly impossible, if not impossible. And I know that this plan is going to make very few people happy. However, we feel strongly that, particularly because we are taking a phased approach, it will enable us during these unprecedented times to accomplish our mission, which is essentially to ensure the safety of our students and staff, along with their families, while also promoting as much student learning and social and emotional development as possible. In addition, it will provide a physical and virtual learning environment that is the most conducive for student learning, development, and growth without increasing the potential for our students and staff to be infected by COVID-19. Likewise, it'll ensure that our students who will be in our buildings at least once a week in Phase 2A and twice a week in Phase 2B and then 4 times a week in Phase 3, the ability to have us observe them and speak to them and make sure that they are physically, socially, and emotionally well and safe from neglect and or abuse. Similarly, it will provide our students that are food insecure with nutritional meals that they need and quite frankly deserve. And finally, on the days that our kids are in school, but even on the days that are not because of what we've been able to negotiate with our before and after care provider, hopefully this plan also provides our parents of students in need of childcare an avenue to pursue it, especially those parents who are essential and or frontline workers. So to summarize, here is your homework. Parents who wish for their child to start the 2020-21 school year in the full-time remote learning option, remember that you must send a letter or email to your child's principal as soon as possible, or at least by July 17th. We need that information so that we can finalize schedules and place our students into those alphabet-based cohorts. Everyone, please go to the Restart of Schools page of our website. You can either use the address noted on this slide, or you simply go to our website at www.sayrevillek12.net. Once you're there, go up to the top left, click on District. Once you're there, go to the bottom left side of that box. Below the pandemic page, click on Restart of School Plan. And once you're in there, you can find all the resources that you need, such as this plan, as well as the Sayreville Restart of Schools survey summary that I referenced earlier, this PowerPoint presentation without my narration, as well as other district and New Jersey Department of Education resources. I hope you enjoyed our presentation. Please remember to contact me or your child's principal should you have any further questions. May God bless you and your entire family and keep you all healthy and safe. Please enjoy the remainder of your summer. I will be in contact with you, and have a pleasant day. Labby out.